What if there were a world? A world where a simple graze on the knee could kill someone. A world where a sore throat could be life-threatening. This world is the world that we all live in today. Antibiotics don't work anymore, and new forms of treatment need to be devised. Antibiotic resistance is a growing issue. It is something relatively unheard of in the general public, and it is caused by the misuse and the misunderstanding of said medicine. There are many resistant strains of bacteria, which are continuing to rise globally. Antibiotic resistance is a serious issue. Antibiotic resistance occurs when microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites change when exposed to antimicrobial drugs like antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals, antimalarial, and anthelmintic. Because of this, microorganisms that develop resistance to antimicrobial resistance are called superbugs. New resistant bacteria are emerging worldwide, which is threatening humanity's ability to treat common infectious diseases, which will result in prolonged illnesses, disability, and ultimately death. With the absence of effective drugs for the prevention and treatment of infections, specific medical procedures such as organ transplantations, cancer chemotherapy, diabetes management, and major surgeries like cesarean sections or hip replacements can become very risky. Naturally, antibiotic resistance occurs over time through genetic changes. Nevertheless, the misuse and overuse of antibiotics is speeding up this process. In a lot of places, antibiotics is misused with people and animals alike, where they are often given without actual oversight. Such examples of misuse include when they are taken by people with viral infections like a cold or the flu, also when they are prescribed as growth enhancers in animals. Because of increased misuse of antibiotics, bacteria are finding ways to become resistant. Even though antibiotics do work, bacteria are still finding ways to become resistant. The misuse of antibiotics has increased the number of drug-resistant germs. Antibiotics are imperative drugs when it comes to treating bacterial infections. One problem with them is the standard treatments are now not as effective and sometimes don't work at all. Bacterial resistance occurs when the bacteria changes in a way that protects it from a drug. An example would be when an antibiotic is prescribed for strep throat, which is caused by the bacterium Streptococcus pyogenes. But it is not the correct treatment for a sore throat, since it is caused by viruses. All of us carry our own bacteria, 2 kilograms to be exact. Normally, we live in harmonic symbiosis with the bacteria in our body. A person has Staphylococcus in and around the skin, Streptococcus in the throat, and billions of intestinal bacteria. A healthy, able-bodied person needs bacteria in their body. Bacteria help digest food, they produce vitamins, and they protect the body from other harmful bacteria. Usually, when penicillin is administered, it kills the disease-causing bacteria. Bacteria always change the structure of their DNA, and mutate. So in another situation, when the penicillin is administered, the harmful bacteria mutates the helpful bacteria into disease-causing bacteria. This can be extremely dangerous because bacteria have a generation time of 20 minutes, while humans have a generation time of 30 years on average. So in a month's time, there will be uncountable amounts of resistant bacteria in a human body. Naturally, stronger antibiotics would be needed, but it would be killing the initially resistant bacteria. Bacteria have become mutated simply because they follow the same Darwinian principle as us. When they are threatened, they protect themselves, and because of their short generation time, they mutate to protect themselves. They do this by changing their DNA, by making enzymes that destroy the antibiotics. They can also pump it out, or block the antibiotics' binding. Their biggest asset is that their resistant genes in their DNA can be passed on onto other bacteria. There are many different strains of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. There are many resistant strains of bacteria that are already quite destructive. One example is Staphylococcus aureus, simply known as MRSA. MRSA is actually quite well known about, but very few people understand the circumstances in which it has become so pervasive. According to the WHO, roughly 1 in 50 people carry a strain of staph, resistant to common antibiotics. If this bug latches onto a wound, it causes an infection that is minor and localized, like in a pimple, or in more serious cases, it involves the heart, lungs, and bones. Another example would be with Clostridium difficile and Actinobacter. For a long while, doctors have been combating a group of 6 hospital-borne pathogens dubbed ESCAPE, which stand for Enterococcus, Staphylococcus, Klebsiella, Actinobacter, Pseudomonas, and Enterobacter. Now, they are evading hospital antibiotics. In the words of Dr. John Bartlett of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, these organisms were present in hospitals 20 years ago. Now, we've used so many antibiotics to treat them, they've become resistant. This bacterium invades vulnerable bodies through hospital equipment, like surgical implants and central lines. A third example would be with gonorrhea and chlamydia. Antibiotic resistance means that sexually transmitted infections, once cured with a couple of pills, would now require more invasive treatments. Dr. William Schnapper, chair of prevention at Vanderbilt Medical Center, believes that, quote, we might have to rely on intravenous or intramuscular treatments, meaning the patient would have to come in or someone would have to go to their house. Those people don't want to be recognized in their home environment as having one of these infections, which a visit would kind of announce, so people will begin avoiding treatment. People then have a spiraling series of problems. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis kills 1.34 million people each year worldwide. This disease, which was once curable by simple antibiotics, is now resistant to multiple drugs. In 2010, the WHO estimated that out of the 12 million cases of tuberculosis, 650,000 were involved in multi-drug resistant variations. The process of treating an illness like this, that is resistant to forms of antibiotics, could require 2 years of intensive care, with toxic and expensive medication that are in short supply. Even with the best of care, only slightly above 50% of patients will actually be cured. E. coli and Salmonella. These bacteria, which are mainly the cause of food poisoning, have now become resistant to drugs, partly because farm animals are being fed antibiotics to encourage growth. According to Dr. Bartlett, quote, 80% of antibiotics in the US are given to animals, not people. Now we're tracing some of these antibiotic-resistant infections back to the farm, end quote. The US Center for Disease Control found that drug-resistant variations of E. coli were causing urinary tract infections among pregnant women. This could be traced back to chickens being fed antibiotics. Usually, E. coli is the main cause of urinary tract infection. While E. coli is becoming resistant to many forms of antibiotics, there are fluctuations in total resistance. This chart displays information for E. coli, which is a foodborne pathogen in the USA. According to a study conducted by the Center for Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policy, or the CDDEP, the antibiotic resistance of drugs like aminopenicillins, amoxicillin clavante, carbapenems, cephalosporins of the third generation, and piperacillin tazobactam increased by 180% from 1999 to 2012. Another conclusion that can be made from this graph is that antibiotic resistance in the USA is steadily increasing. Even though there are drops in antibiotic resistance of amoxicillin clavante, this means that bacteria from the E. coli pathogen is very much slowing down in recent years. Another conclusion that can be made is that antibiotic resistance has increased since the 1990s and through to the 21st century. There are other solutions instead of relying on antibiotics to get rid of bacteria. For the past 3 years, Malaysian PhD student Shu Lam at the University of Melbourne has discovered how to kill superbugs that can no longer be treated with normal antibiotics. The incorrect overuse of antibiotics has led to some strains of bacteria becoming completely resistant. This problem was described by former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to be a fundamental threat to global health and safety. These superbugs killed an estimated 700,000 people a year, and 230,000 newborns among those numbers. According to recent predictions, the number will rise to 10 million people by 2050, beating cancer if left untreated. This will reportedly cause the world economy $100 trillion. Shu Lam believes her resolution to this accumulating problem, which involves killing bacteria using tiny star-shaped molecules that are built with chains of proteins called peptide polymers, is a groundbreaking take on antibiotic resistance. In her own words, quote, we've discovered that the polymers actually target the bacteria and kill it in multiple ways. One method is by physically disrupting or breaking the cell wall of the bacteria. This creates a lot of stress on the bacteria and causes it to start killing itself, end quote. She built these star-shaped molecules at Melbourne's prestigious School of Engineering. When in the system, the polymers attack the superbugs directly, unlike antibiotics, which might also damage nearby healthy cells. Lamb successfully tested this polymer on 6 different superbugs and against 1 strain of mice. Even after multiple mutations and generations of bacteria, the polymer has proven to be quite effective. Lam also said, quote, "We found the polymers to be really good at wiping out bacterial infection. They are actually effective in treating mice infected by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. At the same time, they are quite non-toxic to the healthy cells in the body." End quote. Apart from these polymers, there are other forms of treatment to combating antibiotic resistance. We live in a post-antibiotic era. The time of antibiotics have come and passed. They are not usable anymore due to extreme misusage, where bacteria have become resistant and are continuing to grow.